So this afternoon, there are two topics that will be presented. One is on sexism, the role of men and women, and the difficulties in inequalities between men and women. And the second is sectarianism. And first, Sylvia Wetzel, again, Lama Yeshe student who is teaching throughout Europe at Tibetan and Vipassana centers, will speak about this issue of men and women and equality and problems. And then Fred von Allmen, who is teaching Vipassana in Europe, will speak about the causes of sectarianism. And finally, Martine Bachelor, our French woman who is here, she will speak about some of the underlying features or causes of sectarianism. She has done 18 years of practice, 10 years as a Korean nun in Korea, and now she is teaching in Europe and the USA and South Africa. Also, one other thing, perhaps the discussion this afternoon will be a bit shorter than other times, not taking the full time. And if that's so, then there might be time for His Holiness. If you have reflections after being together for 3 days or things that you would like to say. Well, there is time tomorrow also. Or also there are some other topics or questions from other teachers.
Then perhaps that change mo gusto to salva. That the 지금 the 직수 소리 지금 tum무타네 따지야 대야 뭐도 합시로 간도 몇 살 같으냐 그러시냐고.
Now that we have raised quite a lot of
tomorrow or
quite a lot of issues, the problems that have been arising in the Dharma centers and the Buddhist circles, we have dealt quite a lot about these. So perhaps today or tomorrow it might be worth spending some time on discussing various means or ways by which we can prevent repetitions of these in the future.
What more effective and practical method? What kind of things should be done? So I think each, as I mentioned this morning, everyone has the moral responsibility. With a sense of involvement, sense of commitment, and every the suggestions I think put together, maybe I think good. Then we may find some good idea, then put on paper, and we will implement.
Your Holiness, I would like to start the presentation of the role of men and women in the tradition of Buddhism in the East and in the West with a short visualization. I would invite everybody here in the room, I would invite you, please imagine you are a male being coming to a Buddhist center, and you come into the main room and you see this beautiful Tara Buddha, this female Buddha on the wall, surrounded by 16 Arhatinis, female Buddhas. And you have the great possibility and chance to talk to Her Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama, who in 14 incarnations always choose to have female rebirth. You hear about the 17th Karmapa, who choose to be reborn 17 times as a woman. You are surrounded by very high Rinpoche, she Rinpoches beautiful, educated, strong women, and then you see the bhikshunis coming into the room, self-confident and outspoken, and then you see the monks coming into the room, very shy and timid, and then you hear about the lineage lamas of the tradition who are all female, down to the female Buddhatara in the center. And then imagine you are male, yeah, and you are approaching a lama, and you are a little bit insecure and a little bit irritated, and you ask, why? Are there only female symbols, female Buddhas, female teachers, female lineage lamas? And this lama tells you, why do you worry? Men and women are equal. Men and women are equal, women are equal, I mean, almost. Well, I mean, we have some scriptures which say a male rebirth is inferior. But, I mean, this is just a compassionate perception of reality. Isn't it so that men have a more difficult time when all the leaders, politically, spiritually, philosophically, are women? Well, then maybe this male student who is very sincere goes to another lama of a Mahayana tradition and says, what about all these women? I mean, I'm a man. I mean, how can I identify? And then this teacher says, don't worry, you just meditate on shunyata. In shunyata, no man, no woman, no body, nothing, no problem. And then you go even to a tantric teacher and ask him, well, all these women and I'm a man, I don't know how to relate. He said, don't worry, you are Dhaka, beautiful Dhaka, you are so useful for all these practitioners to rouse their energy and to help them get enlightened. Well, this is the visualization. Well, now I'm stopping to tell fantasy, and now I'm going to talk about conventional reality. So, this woman who has entered this male world of symbols, of teachers, of lineage lamas, of scriptural authorities, this woman starts thinking, what are the consequences of this setting? Well, if, as some scriptures say, a female rebirth is a lower rebirth, as for instance in the 8 qualities for a good human rebirth, yeah, the special qualities, if that is written, it might lead to the fact that some of the not so developed male human beings will take this as a support of their male egos. And I have met at least 2 Western monks telling me, I'm so sorry for you. I made it this life. I got a male rebirth. I'm so sorry for you. But you can pray for a female rebirth next life, for a male rebirth in next life. Another consequence of this is that, as is very obvious everywhere in the world where Buddhism prevails, monks get much more financial support than nuns, because it's much higher merit to support monasteries with monks than to support nunneries with nuns. Okay, this is some of the consequences. There are many, many more. I mean, another consequence of this is that male teachers, of course, in their majority choose male successors, and that male Rinpoches choose to reincarnate as boys. And even my beloved teacher, Lama Yeshe, who is the only Lama I know who at least in a previous life was a woman, choose in his next life to be Lama Yeshe as a man, a Tibetan, and choose in this life to be a Spanish boy. So, another effect of this scriptural quote, if taken, another consequence of this scriptural quote is
it's simply out of curiosity, how was it determined that Lama Yeshe's previous reincarnation was a woman?
This was told to us in Kopan Monastery sometimes by Western students introducing the lamas. And I think I remember quotes of Lama Yeshe mentioning, not in terms of I was a woman, but when he saw his many women students, he had many strong women students, and sometimes he said, maybe my old monastery, my old nunnery is coming together again.
I see.
Yeah?
I see.
So another consequence of this scriptural quote, which is made very often, is a general kind of conceit, contempt of male practitioners, monks or lay, to women. Kind of a little bit down. Yeah? There are many more other consequences I will mention later. If you follow the Mahayana interpretation, all is void. Just meditate on shunyata. There is no body, there is no woman, there is no man, there is just emptiness. Well, I try to do, and maybe I have incorrect or correct shunyata experience, at least some kind of open space, no gender feeling. No, it's true, in deep meditation I don't feel my gender. But then I come back, dependent arising, yeah? I come back, I'm in space and time. And there, the women cook the coffee, the women serve the teachers, the women transcribe the teachings of the lamas, and the lamas talk. The books are put together by women, and the name on the top is the male name, and all this stuff. Yeah? So samsara goes on in this hierarchical way, like before. So I find, by using the Mahayana argument, it's all empty. It doesn't seem to change very much.
I think this is wrong.
I think so too. I think
Yes,
it's wrong
basically
too.
it's wrong interpretation. 지금도 관대니 추진도 추진나도 저 탐정을 하시고 관대니 염도 와.
So, from the perspective of emptiness, there is even no distinctions between samsara and nirvana. So to use this as a justification for discrimination is definitely
I think
not
so.
right.
But it is used in the West. It is used, and I'm told this, if I complain about this hierarchical structure in Tibetan Buddhism, then people, Western teachers and Eastern teachers say, don't worry, it's everything empty.
I see. Good excuse with that.
Very good excuse. Very good excuse, I think. And the third very problematic result of the tantric. Sorry. And then if you use the tantric argument, yeah, about women are very precious. They are very precious dakinis. I mean, we have heard some of the disastrous results of this argument. Because some of the Western lamas say, oh, beautiful dakinis, come into my bed, I can use you. And some of the Western teachers go along the same, and they even tell their females, I have friends who study with Western teachers or Tibetan teachers who apply this dakini principle to their Western students and tell them they will have realizations if they sleep with a teacher. But I didn't see, and they told me this didn't happen. Well, this is some of the consequences.
Actually, one Western teacher, one student, told me, teachers on the teachers on the Lamanim Dolia, Chubajavina, the Shivjum Grissin, Shajons, and she woke up, came into the Shan.
His Holiness also heard from someone who told him that she was told that by sleeping with the teacher, with the Lama, it will lead to high realizations, but at the end there wasn't much.
Right, except for children, which were no tulkus. Now, the next step of my analysis is, what do I do with this situation? So, my basic approach now, when I hear any kind of these arguments, is who benefits from this statement? Who has benefit from a statement? And I mean, if somebody is quoting to me, a female rebirth is a lower rebirth, I ask, who benefits from this statement? Who has an advantage? Who can take advantage of this statement? And as I saw in the consequences I was describing, most men in our patriarchal societies in East and West take advantage in terms of blowing up their male ego and despising women and using women as an object of desire, of power, of work, of whatever. Yeah? So my basic attitude now towards the teachings is who benefits, who can take advantage of these teachings. And not is it true or not, did the Buddha say it, or did some kind of patriarchal monks write it down? Or so. I don't care so much who wrote it, but I ask who benefits and what can I do with it? And my main attitude is I just ignore them. I just don't bother. And what I try to do in terms of the teachings given, I try to introduce gender, man being a man or a woman, as one subject in all meditations. So whenever we meditate on dependent arising, we meditate on the dependent arising of images of women on men or men. I do this in my courses. How do the images we have about women or men, the roles they have, arise dependently on time, culture, social strata, class, yeah? Whatever country, third world, Western world, Eastern world, or so on. This is one application. Or on the level of the emotions, the 3 poisons. Let's take the example of the 3 poisons, because this inspired me to this approach. I was for many years studying the 3 poisons: anger, hatred, and closed-minded ignorance. Okay. Somebody gets disappointed by someone, and then this person gets very angry and does bad things against things and persons, reacts with violence. I always thought, then I don't have anger. I never react that way. I never react with beating or yelling or screaming or slamming doors. I don't, or beating, I don't. When I'm disappointed, I go more back, getting depressed, or think, oh, I'm not worth, I have no value, I'm not good enough, he must be right, he must be right, she must be right. So my reaction is different from what the normal teachings describe. And so,
Normal teachings.
And so what I try to, and when then the teachings suggest, if you get disappointed and get a little bit angry, you please try to cultivate empathy for the other person, try to understand the other person's point of view, try to cultivate love and compassion for the other person, I think. In some way, if I apply this straight away, somehow it reinforces my tendency anyway to think it's my fault. I already think when some conflict happens, it's my fault. I must be stupid. I don't have value. I'm nobody. Yeah? So it reinforces, if I apply it strictly, it reinforces my tendency. So I think it's more useful to first very clearly analyze the emotional conditions and the emotional reactions. And this is what I introduce into Lamrim meditation. I introduce, like, remember last week you got disappointed. And now you watch clearly. How did you react? Did you get angry? Did you blame the other one? Did you blame yourself? Did you get depressed? Did you try to rationalize it away? Oh, there's no need to get angry because rationalize. We do very much. Kind of conceptually say, no problem. Or did I distract myself by looking TV? Did I distract myself by smoking or drinking or reading newspaper? So first step is always analyze, how did you react? And many women find they react completely different from what is described in the teachings. And I think this is so because the teachings normally describe a normal male reaction to a problem. Because so many teachers are men, the tradition are all men, and they describe their experience. So they describe male experience.
Yes.
Yes? And in this way, that's the point. Yeah, I think so. And so I work now through every delusion. I work through the 6 root delusions and the 5 delusions and the 20 secondary delusions, and I try to analyze with my students or with the people I meditate with, how do we react? And then we try to find out the best antidote to resolve the problem. And
Yes.
I think
Continue. Yes.
And I think if we apply this method, which I described now, introducing gender as one subject in meditation on all levels, concepts we have, emotional patterns we have, behavior we have in speech and body, then maybe many of the problems which were described during the last 3 days would not happen, because men would be much more aware how they behave in body, using women, for instance, behave in speech, talking about monks all the time, even though there are nuns in the room, or many lamas talking about the practitioner does this and this, and then he does this and this, and then he does this, and 75% of the people are women. This is insulting women, this is harming women, this is making them sad, this is creating suffering for women. So how they behave in speech, talking about he. And I mean, this is not only the problem of men, this is a problem of culture, because most of the Western languages, and I assume Hinduism, Sanskrit too, they confuse even in language, men, male beings, and mankind, the same word. Human in English, men, are all women men? No, women are no men, but women are men. They are humans. In French, les hommes, les femmes sont hommes, sind die Frauen, are the women men. It's the same word used for men and mankind. And this creates a lot of confusion in human beings' mind, because the language is already so patriarchal that women even don't appear in language. Yes? Yeah.
뭐 무슨 말? 나는 별에 안 올래야 너 미스를 저는 비밀이 팀 말해.
네, tamche mi.
제가 really casual. 오늘 자자가
Yes, family.
자자.
Yeah. And for instance, you know all this, the bodhisattvas and their sons. And which son of good family does this and this. So even in speech, there is a lot of ignoring the existence of women. And if male teachers do not reflect on this, this creates a lot of suffering. And I think it gives reason for them to be proud, because they confuse themselves with all mankind, even in language. And this is, I think, part of the reason why men are so proud. Because the language supports it. Yeah? So,
I don't know if you can really make that generalized statement. It's so sweeping, you know.
I mean, let's say some.
And it's that kind of problem which makes the communication and understanding impossible.
No.
It's such a confrontational stance.
No. My point is not to say the men are such and the women are such, but I want that both of us, I started to reflect on my being a woman in the tradition and with the teachings. And this is one of my consequences, I would strongly recommend male teachers and female teachers, male students and female students, to consider this subject in their practice and teaching. And on a very practical level, I suggest, and I do this, women retreats, I do mixed retreats and women retreats. And in the women retreats, it gets much more detailed. And I would suggest that some of the men who feel good with it, do men's retreats to reflect with men. And I heard that Jack wants to do this and that Kulananda does it in his organization. I think this is very good. Whereas in the West at the moment, there are more women willing to do women's retreats at the moment, to reflect on it, because of course we are suffering, so we do retreats to resolve this suffering. The men are not suffering so much, so they come later. And yeah, I mean, and stop in a minute. It's just 1 minute. And the last point I wanted to make is, generally when we talk a lot about mindfulness in Buddhism, very much, but I would really suggest that we direct mindfulness to our behavior as men and women, and not just general. This would, I think, very much help to get, for the men's side, understanding of how they treat women. They don't even notice. I mean, in one of these, even in this conference, yesterday we thought it's a bit late for the problem of sexism to come so late, on the third day only. And some of the conference participants even, why, that's not such a problem for them. Yeah? So, and now my question to Your Holiness. What would you recommend to your male students, lamas, to help overcome their patriarchal behavior in body, speech, and mind?
One shloka in the 8 verses, it says, you consider the lowest sentient being out of all sentient beings. So when I see an insect, I try to practice that. So there are some, I found some reasons. Is that insect, of course, from certain viewpoint, that insect is much lower than me. I'm a human being. Unfortunate. I'm a human being, a Buddhist monk, things like that. But at the same time, from another angle, I'm poorer than that insect. Because that insect, I think, very innocent. I have this wonderful human intelligence, but in spite of that, I'm doing some wrong things. So from that viewpoint, I'm much worse than that insect. So from that viewpoint, I can develop genuine respect towards that insect. So that's the Buddhist Karda. I think that the Buddhist also they will practice. From that angle, I do not see much problem. But still, I think, due to my ignorance, maybe, women or other sentient beings, men or women, including insect. If you adopt that kind of attitude, I don't know. Right? That's how this case. Semja tamja da mo michigo shege marwa. Yeah, I don't know. This is my own sort of feeling or interpretation. We do not say as a human being. I think, strictly speaking, from the Buddhist viewpoint, the human right is something exclusive because of that. I think it is something biased. So I think our way of approach is not just a human being, but all sentient beings. So from that viewpoint, is the human being and the insect the same. So we should treat same way. So the other case, firstly, is the big cause of the distinction, right? Separation. Human being. Because of that. At least we should have some kind of the concern about human being. The others. I think that concept, then within a human being, male, female. Then male, there. I think that kind of so that she was to slay me to. The big 10 men or something. The dig is change man or Dajon.
There might be some differences in the way you relate to others. Ideally speaking, a practicing Buddhist must include within the concept of I or we the entire sentient being, not just human beings. And from that point of view, even thinking about human rights is being partial and exclusivist. But what happens is generally, we tend to relate to others in a very sort of partial and exclusivist manner. We first of all divide between other sentient beings and human beings, and then within human beings we tend to divide between male and female, and then from within the male category and female category, then we go on dividing. So perhaps many of the problems really arise from that sort of basic way of relating to others.
And anyway, I think your explanation, to me personally, very helpful, very useful. You see, it gives me some kind of answer because of the new angle, right?
New angle of looking at things.
Down the big shoe. What is your reaction? And Zen masters within Buddhist tradition. What do you say?
I think it's very helpful advice also. It's a very big problem in the Theravada world.
Yes.
The division is very big.
It seems the.
Yeah, we have a big problem in our kind of tradition with the dominance of the male order. So it is very much in our concern to try and bring things into a line with a more egalitarian and universal view that Sylvia is describing, but also coming from the sort of orthodox monastic position or order. Sometimes it's like pulling along a train, like a locomotive. It's a heavy weight you have to pull along behind you. But one sees that it's necessary to make the effort and receive a lot of criticism for not being able to change everything all the time, immediately. But certainly a change of view is necessary. And I think in the context of the West, we are much more able to do this maybe than in the context of Asia.
So, from the Zen practice viewpoint,
actually, what Sylvia said, I think was excellent, because this is actually what happens. And it is harder in the Eastern world maybe to change, but maybe just as hard in the Western world, because everything, his story, not her story, everything is recorded in this way. But I think it's really a great history. His story. I mean,
I see.
Some women write her story.
Oh, then Tibetan language is much better.
But Your Holiness,
I think it's a very wonderful challenge for the male to see this and begin to accepting this, because it's something, it's another dimension that we're coming towards. another dimension, and everyone will benefit.
I think so.
This is what I'm very interested in this.
What do the nuns who are here also think?
It was very meaningful to me what Sylvia said, because I've found how the prejudice, even the subtle prejudice in the institution has affected me psychologically and become a hindrance on the path. You know, even though my teachers are very, very encouraging and I receive the same teachings as the Western monks, this subtle prejudice makes you lose confidence. And in the same way, having, for the first years of my ordination, I tried to become a Tibetan nun and lower my head and speak like this and stay in the back of the room. And that does something to you psychologically, so that you, it makes a block on the path. Because that strong self-confidence you were talking about this morning, it takes that away from you.
The feminist
It seems it's an issue which, if you look at Buddhist literature, it seems that Buddhism has, in a way, sort of thought about this problem. Because if you look at the prominence given to the story of Tara, it does reflect some appreciation of the concern. Another thing which came up here is that there does seem to be some differences in the culture where the language, different languages arise. For instance, in the case of Tibetan, for, let us say, Rita Sadhana, you arise into a deity, and then in English, if you have to translate it, you have to say, at his heart, and blah, blah, blah. Whereas in Tibetan, you use te tukar, which is a gender-free pronoun. And similarly, as you pointed out, that history, the very term history, sort of reflects some bias.
This was a joke. This was a joke. It was a joke because it sounds like it was a joke. Yeah. But you have kier men in Tibet.
No, that's yes.
Lower rebirth for women. Kier men.
I don't think that much use to explain, then it seems like defensive. So I don't think much use.
But I mean, let me...
Reality is reality.
Let me comment here, because quite a lot of work is being done in other areas of Western discipline, like philosophy, literature, and psychology, where there are serious attempts being made at reinterpreting the traditional interpretation of these disciplines and trying to look at what are the hidden prejudices of male-dominated reading. And I think that is very, very, very good. But at the same time, I think it is important, this is my personal view, but at the same time, I think it's important for a woman also to be sensitive to the feeling of men and not come up with sweeping statements like all men are rapists and all men are stupid and that sort of thing.
Oh, yes. At least I think comparatively, I think the Buddhist attitude, basically, I think towards all sentient beings, not alone a human being. So I think it's much easier. And then particularly according to Tantrayana, Mahanodaya Tantrayana. Again, perhaps I think you may find some different explanation. But Kyamadana Puindis is all about that. Kyamadana Puindis. According to Mahanodaya Tantrayana, the male practitioner, whenever he met one woman, I think you may shock. You see in Mahanodaya Tantrayana, the female, I think perhaps due to the theory of Dagini, perhaps. So in any case, you see the special emphasis, right? Emphasis is that is the respect towards the women there. So now, therefore, so whenever you, I think that basically, according to Mahamudra Yoga Tantrayana, the Buddha nature, that is a common between Sutrayana and Tantrayana. Then the precise meaning of the Buddha nature, there is differences. Of course, the according to the concept of the precise meaning of Buddha nature according to Sutrayana, that the Tantrayana also accept that. On top of that, there's additional sort of the understanding or the example of the Buddha nature. There's a clear light. So now clear light usually is considered as a female. Feminine. So the all deeper experience or practice is built on that basis. So therefore, you see, that considered as a mother. So then, you see, the female, of course, the female. So therefore, although they did Dagini, you see, the concept of Dagini also is related with that theory. So therefore, you see, even a monk like myself, although sometimes I have forgot, but occasionally I remember. You see, whenever I met one woman, you see, they mentally, you see, repeat or recite. So remember that you are my mother, and till Buddhahood, Kyorangi women storage.
Until Buddhahood, may I be sustained by your milk.
Chamzi women storages. So I think there's some kind of especially emphasis on it there. Then usually my feeling is the female side, they must develop the self-confidence and take the maximum opportunity, make themselves equal in every field. That's more important. Then in case you see, there are tradition, religious tradition or social tradition, they actually, you see, they become obstacle, then we have to tackle that.
That's what I do.
So that's most welcome.
But in a skillful way.
Yes.
Skillful way.
And very gentle.
Your Holiness, one more thing. One of the many adaptations that we have made at our Zen Center is to try to make a Buddha figure that is beyond gender limitations and beyond ethnic and racial limitations. You know, if you look at a Tibetan Buddha, it has a Tibetan face. If you look at a Chinese Buddha, it has a Chinese face. If you look at a Japanese Buddha...
Tibetan Buddha, I don't think any Tibetan face there. I don't know. Really? I don't know. I don't know.
But okay, not Tibetan.
Yes, Chinese, I think this is, even if the Buddhist tradition, some hair. That is Chinese tradition. That is quite clear, yes.
And Japanese, and Burmese, and Thai. But what is an American face? Any face you give it will be limited. And in the same way, if any face you give it will be limited racially. It will be a white face, or a yellow face, or a black face.
Oh, Buddha is a historical factor. He's Indian.
Yes. But what about Buddha nature?
Buddha is formless.
Right. So that's the problem. So anyway, let me finish this.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so we asked a sculptor, a famous sculptor, to make a Buddha figure that had just a suggestion of facial features, not clear facial features. And it's stone, so it is rather primitive. It's erupting out of rock. It looks like a mountain, sort of. So obviously it has some disadvantages because it's not clear, but as a teaching device, as a teaching way, we can say that our Buddha nature is beyond male or female, beyond Tibetan, Korean, Japanese, Chinese, beyond black or white.
Nice.
It's beyond form.
Yeah, we couldn't do that.
What?
Anila, do you have anything also? Please. Yes.
About sexism? I mean, when I came to India, I was ordained and lived in a monastery with 100 monks, and I was the only nun. I think that's why eventually I went and lived by myself in a cave. The monks were very kind. I mean, I didn't actually live in the monastery, but I had a room apart from the monastery. The monks were very kind. They were all my cousins, my uncles, some of them like my brother. I never had any problem from a sexual or any harassment point of view. They were all very wonderful. But, of course, I was unfortunately within this female form. I mean, they actually told me, well, they prayed that in my next lifetime I would have the good fortune to be reborn as a monk so that I could actually join the monastery. In the meantime, they didn't hold it against me that I had this inferior rebirth in female form. It wasn't too much my fault. And they had compassion. I once asked one of our Rinpoches if there was any advantage in having a female form. He said he would go away and think about it. The next day, he said to me, I have been thinking about it. No, there are no advantages. So I thought, well, at least one advantage is we don't have a male ego. Anyway, yes.
That is a family ego.
But isn't it the case that it seems these days the female ego is also rising?
The female ego is an expression of, in the way it comes out like that and what you saw as being confrontational, it's a way of saying we're in pain because of this. And we're trying to get that pain acknowledged instead of, oh, no, it's really not any problem. Everything's equal. You know, at least if the pain could be acknowledged, even if it can't be remedied, I think it would make us feel better.
As I mentioned earlier, I think the most important thing is I think at least from the Buddhist viewpoint, the potential, the basic potential is same. So make use, full, and take every opportunity. Then if really is some kind of obstacle things there, then we have to use it, discuss, and remove.
Yes.
I think that's I think the more effective and more realistic way. Sometimes I think they just shouting and creates a lot of uncomfortable feeling. Then perhaps then the matters of imagination of shining.
although it's very difficult for me to say that, but sometimes it is also possible that some of the obstacles that we might perceive could be more imagined than they really are.
Now one certain problem about the Vinaya, you see, when we at least according the Savasiti, Mula Savasiti Vadam, the full Bhikshuni ordination must receive both Bhikshu and Bhikshuni. I think Bhikshuni. Preceptor should be Bhikshu. So in case of receiving Bhikshu vow, no need Bhikshuni. So there's some kind of prejudice. So then when we come to a stage to change that, it's very difficult. This is set up by Buddha. So, but then perhaps, as we discussed yesterday, you said some kind of the big gathering from various Buddhist countries, is a monk, come and discuss and the reality and all the reasons. Then, if the unanimous agreement there, I think, or the majority, usually is the monk, the majority, that's the way. So no single monk or bhikshu, full authority, only is the sangha. So on the basis, on the principle of majority, I think we may change, because we can change, right? Introduce some changes.
I feel also as a woman that there are certain spiritual advantages to being a woman. That it's easier to feel the pain and suffering of other beings, and therefore easier to give rise to compassion. And in dealing with men and women in the Dharma, that does seem to be that it comes more quickly to be able to make the link of empathy with all other beings suffering, because you've had some experiences just by being a girl and being a woman yourself, no matter what your situation has been. So I think there is that other side, and that we should have a lot of confidence in our own experience.
And also, I noticed, you see, when I give some teaching, lecture, there's a whole northern Himalayan region, and also in Mongolia and other parts of Russia, like the Buryat or Tuva or these area, the majority, I think almost 60-70% women who come to teaching. So it seems there's trend, the women is more kasoda.
There seems to be sort of more widespread spiritual interest in the women than men.
So what is the reason? We have to carry some research or investigations. I don't know. I see. Out of 5 billion, the female population is bigger?
Yes. More women, a little bit, 51%.
A little bit.
51%.
Compassion.
Usually, Your Holiness, many men say that if they come to a spiritual teaching or admit that they need some help, it's a sign of weakness. And so there seems to be an obstacle among many men in the West to say that they need some help.
I would say there are some sort of significant differences in the culture. For instance, like in the West, for a man to weep is seen as really, weak and very bad. Whereas this is not the case in Tibetan society. So there are, significant differences. So we can't say men in general like that,
Then I'm very weak, I think. in the public, quite often you see people there. I see. I don't know. Yes, now.
So, shall we?
Thank you, Your Holiness, for your very great openness to listen. Because there are very, very few lamas and teachers around who are willing to listen.
Really?
Because they think they know what women are. They know what women think. They know what the place of women is. There is very few male teachers who really want to listen and to ask, what do you think? And for me, it's very, very precious experience to have you listen and be interested. Thank you.
But you may not know whether these words really go in deep mind or not.
We'll see. I will check.
Oh, yes, that's good.
I will listen to your talks from now on.
I think now, recent years, I really put some effort among Tibetan, the nunnery. More is nunnery, and this nunnery should not remain as a traditional way, just recite, learn few sadhana. No, you must learn. All this is the great text, just like monk carry, study. So this I really make some effort. So some credit, right?
So this is like an offering of realization or practice to you.
Yes, now.
Your Holiness, I would like to address the problem of sectarianism. And I'm sure it's not necessary to say much about the problems and disharmony and separation that are created through sectarianism. But rather, I'd like to focus a little bit on some of the causes and manifestations of it. Very often, teachers, both in Asia and Western teachers, promote sectarianism, maybe out of conceit or of competition or jealousy, even more often out of ignorance. For example, we find that the tradition lacks a practice aspect, as we spoke about yesterday and this morning, an aspect that we really need. But when we want to look for it somewhere else, we're being discouraged by teachers or even get threatened with expulsion from that tradition. And that's a very difficult situation for a student. We We hear about fights between two monasteries because of differences in certain dharma points. We hear of traditions who fight some kind of war, sometimes even with guns or with protectors or with the right view. There are schools that call themselves non-sectarian, and they declare the practices of others to be good preliminaries, while their own are declared to be the most supreme. And there are forms of sectarianism that are promoted in texts through often supposed skillful means, often handed down over centuries, what I would call well-intended sectarianism. They're texts with deep teachings, but on the side, perhaps they like to make a point, demonstrate, for example, that high practices are also for lay people. So, to make the point, the very realized monk, disciple, of the Buddha, enlightened ones, they're made to look ridiculous, or some outrageous statements about one kind of individual is made in one text. And the names are used of individuals that in another tradition are seen as the most enlightened beings. I don't want to give an example.
I see. I see.
Beings of that in one tradition are seen as the pinnacle, the highest realization. In maybe later texts or texts from another school, they're sort of made to look like some stupid fools. Maybe to make a point that could be helpful at that time for those new students, but at the same time carries this kind of sectarianism seed in it. Or I practiced in a retreat for a whole winter in Bodh Gaya doing Vipassana practice. Then my teacher heard that I was going to Dharamsala for the summer. And he said, this is an example, he said, with true compassion and care for me, he said, Dharamsala is a wonderful place, but be careful, there's Tantra. He was genuinely concerned that I would be misled and be in great danger. And it goes in every direction from every tradition I have met in some ways towards other traditions. I find most extreme Buddhist take on Hindu traditions, an attitude that is maybe grown out of the centuries of rivalry on one hand and intermingling in India. And I've found that sometimes the poorest Hindu tenets, such as nihilism and eternalism, are presented as the views, while the most subtle practices are the most subtle practices, they're never talked about, or if ever, then they're sometimes misrepresented, which I've heard. And all this comes very often, not out of jealousy or of conceit or of rivalry, but out of compassion. Sometimes wise and certainly justified, and sometimes quite ignorant. And I think that all this comes down to what I think is maybe the main cause for sectarianism as I see it. It's the lack of information, the lack of understanding, and the lack also of practice or trying some practice of other systems.
True.
Or worse, believing that one knows about the other schools, perhaps because the other schools use the same terms, even though they often mean something completely different by the same term. And then hearing about this, coming from within one's own school and one's own system and saying, oh, right, this is what this means, this is what that means, very often missing the point. And when I say that, I come from a place of having had teachings in different traditions and then being amazed how much sometimes a teacher with true interest and compassion explains something that totally is not true for that other tradition, just because from this side it looks like that. And I think maybe this can sometimes be the most devastating form of sectarianism, because it is so well intended and there's no bad really thought about it, and everybody thinks they're doing the best in that situation. So the question to Your Holiness is, how can we avoid those problems in the West, or at least make them less? How to relate to teachers who are effectively sectarian, and to that kind of text that I mentioned? And with that, the question, if we expose them, if we speak about that, we're in a way already sectarian ourselves, putting down that way. But if we don't react, then we become guilty of complicity.
Very true. Obviously, in the previous time, I think that due to lack of contact, personal contact, and then also the lack of information. So as a result, even I think the genuine, some of the very sincere,
problems like that arise even out of really good intentions.
So now, the only way, I think the proper way is you should receive teaching from various traditions as much as you can. Then meantime, among Tibetan, I always say appealing among Tibetan, as lamas or geshes, we non-sectarian that's generation mikaje de kaucheche da sagin samos tontonji lamas tonlosh luzeng na toya mindus sadanga gwana lo di injimiji ni 정다 치고 있으면 무슨 비교 제대로 그래서 최시전 게 중요하면 그 소스게 두야말데 미유도 가다 배즈도 치고
Although I've not been able to make a sort of a formal plan and execute it, but I've been making requests to many Tibetan lamas the need to not only be familiar and deeply sort of rooted in their own tradition, but also study and practice other traditions as well, at least have a good understanding of other traditions, because as I've been encouraging Western Buddhists, practicing Buddhists, to be as non-sectarian as possible and have and develop as wide understanding of Buddhism, of various traditions as possible. But on occasions, on a number of occasions, Western students have requested me to send teachers to centers who can teach all the four traditions, and I have had difficulties finding such lamas. So therefore I've been appealing to the Tibetan lamas to study all other traditions as well.
Mm-hmm. Then further the contact, as I mentioned before, so far the Tibetan Buddhist contact, the Zen tradition, Zen practitioner, as well as the Theravada, the system.
There is no satisfactory or adequate contact with other Buddhist traditions like Zen and Theravada.
다 치받은 낭바다 너무 배게 샤오스네 디야 양아주 섹트 non-sectarian 시다냐 니버지가 리리스는 게 맨다스네. I think there I don't know the English the exact meaning of the non-sectarian sectarian. Maybe I think the two levels. One level is the non-sectarian means you implement all the different teaching. And then another level, this is our attitude towards other non-Buddhist tradition, as there's fundamental differences. Creator, concept of creator or concept of soul, things like that. So then it is difficult to practice. Now, for example, once you accept the Shunya theory, then there's no place to accept creator, absolute, absolute truth, or the soul, something permanent. Very difficult. If you accept God, then go very detailed, then very difficult to accept Shunya. So like that. So that on that level, I think the non-sectarian means, to me, now for example, I am telling this to other people, and also I believe that to me, Buddhism is best. So my practice is Buddha Dharma, because it suits me. This does not mean Buddhism is best for everyone. Certainly not. So the different people, this is different religion, is more suitable. So long I respect others' individual right. So I must respect their tradition, no matter what something is wrong from the Buddhist viewpoint. There's something different, entirely different. So there is the
So one meaning of non-sectarianism could be understood in terms of what I just stated, said here, that which can be applied in a Buddhist attitude towards another non-Buddhist tradition. For instance, like so far as your own spiritual inclinations and spiritual path is concerned, Buddhism is the best suited to your needs. But that is not to say that you can make a claim that universally Buddhism is the best tradition. So at the same time, you do not accept within your own spiritual framework, within your own spiritual path, concepts of creator, absolute soul, eternal soul, and so forth. But at the same time, you do not use that as grounds for disparaging spiritual traditions that subscribes to such views.
And of course, this does not mean every the solution
At the same time, that is not to say that everything, all the elements of practices and thoughts that one finds in other traditions, non-Buddhist traditions, are to be discarded so far as your own spiritual needs are concerned, because there could be various elements, aspects in the non-Buddhist traditions which you might find useful, which you could integrate into your own practice.
Your Holiness, I understand that many leading Christian theologians nowadays speak of the most profound way of expressing the nature of God as shunyata, and they use an expression from the Greek kenosis as the equivalent in the Christian theology, so that actually in the contact with Buddhist philosophy they have arrived at a dispensing with the idea of God as an external being and a personal creator. And in many universities, looking at God as an external being is kind of laughed at, and much more the realization of shunyata, of true emptiness, is taken as equivalent as a realization of the nature of ultimate reality.
Yes. I heard some say that God, the precise meaning is something like, infinite love. And we can accept. Or ultimate truth.
Your Holiness, I had a long talk with a Christian Benedictine monk who is giving many talks in Germany. And he was living close to our center. And I entered his room and there was a tanka and a Buddha statue. And so I asked him after in our discussion, what did you learn from Buddhism? And he said, two things. First, from the Tibetan tradition I learned the importance of the guru, and the importance of the guru, of the teacher. And second, from the three Kaya teachings, I learned to understand Trinity.
Yes.
And he says God is Dharmakaya, The Holy Ghost is Sambhogakaya, and Jesus is Nirmanakaya. This I learned.
Mesti dus lobtha tu de ta andi yambe kasore Trinity lobjani mi Christian crowds rang mi da ngam mi de ja khor chamashana and Christians who's me chango ya nyoro sirisha.
Although it is possible to interpret the concept of Trinity along those lines, there are some grounds on which one can do. But the problem really is, if one were to interpret it in that way, then that really leaves out the possibility of the really accepting the Christian idea of Trinity. If that is the case, then the uniqueness of Christianity.
That's I think a little bit too far. Too far. I don't know, but I know.
He believes that.
So good. That's good.
Philosophically,
다른 각자시면 뉴스로 써요. 다 되지. 이거 말로. 죄송해요. 죄송합니다.
I suggested that there might be different situations where the kind of debate that takes place in sort of in a specific literatures of particular tradition that can be viewed sort of where, for instance, if you were to read philosophical literature, that is of a particular Buddhist school, you will find refutations of various positions which might be held by other schools of thought. And in some of these cases, you can look at those debate, not so much in terms of my position and your position, and therefore my position is right, but rather in order to allow the sort of unfolding of diverse meanings of a particular view. And one way of doing it is to cite various alternative understandings, viewpoints on that particular theme, and then attacking it and refuting it and then stating your own positions. An example I gave is if you were to read Kirubji's a text on Pramanavartika, his commentary, he is very vociferous in his attack of various positions. If you examine, and some of these positions belong to Gyaltsabje, who is not only his colleague but also his guru. And then if you read, there is another text by Kirub Rinpoche in which he takes an oath and says that in all the written work that I've done, I have stated various positions and I've refuted, I have criticized, I've attacked, but throughout all these work, and there was never any personal sort of attacks that I've made, no pollution in my motivation. They were done purely to allow the appreciation of the diversity that one could understand in the meaning of a particular statement or sentences or viewpoint. So I just pointed out that is a possibility.
Now I think the important thing is the argument within really is sharp-minded and open-minded. Argument is very beautiful. It's very useful. But then, unfortunately, suppose they want say they want Giluk, or one is a Sakya, one is a Nyingma. They high level, with I think full sort of the foundation of the other thing. Then debate, very useful, clarify many the vague things. But then the consequence is those people who do not have that kind of level, they just that's the
then they will misinterpret, misconstrue.
So therefore, right from the beginning, you see, man, I guess, that Nanzo Monas in Derisha, round the good class at one. Seven of that, Rangram, that was challenging, that who to do that.
So the best really means of really arriving at such an insightful sort of position is to apply the arguments to oneself.
The difficulty there I found is also, even though it clarifies enormously, some of the schools were never held against by somebody who was of that school. So before it all started, it was already clear who was going to lose and who was going to win. Isn't it? There's never a Sautrantrika or Vaibhashika who is going to really, in the long run, win the debate. And then these views were taken, the ones that lost, which were the lower schools, right? And were said, and that's the views they have in Southeast Asia, which is not even true. And that's where it becomes very critical.
The same case came up with the Zen school with the debate at Samye, and the Tibetans always citing to this day that debate of the views of some Hoshang monk, Kamalashila's debate, instead of checking with modern Zen teachers what their views are on quiescence of thought and so on.
No, here, I have, I think, some bit different observations. Sorry. It's the Hashang, you know, Hashang already when they shut the Shankarashita and Bama Sambhava and Chizun Dezen, when you see the all three there, already Hashang was there. And in fact, there is one particular place at Samye where the Hashang remain. So the name of the place called Samden Muling, Miu Samdeling.
The site of the immutable Samadhi.
So if all Hashang is something wrong, then naturally they will not not allow to have that their own is a place. So that means the original Hashang, I mean the proper understanding or the special, I think, the qualification about Samadhi. So the place, the very name of the place called the
immutable Samadhi.
So they carry, their practice. Like
like the special site set up for the practitioners of Tantra, Ngapa. And then there was a special site set up for the translators.
So like that way. So this shows the Chandarakshita accept or respect or acknowledge, their sort of special rule. So then he made sort of a prediction. In future, some individual Hashang will come and spread wrong understanding about Shunya. Then at that time, my disciple Kamalashil should invite and make them debate. So therefore, I think so that this show Hashang slowly Modadi tako Noriking Shegorba. This Shegority, that Jung Hashang means Lemua. So that Longi Ramjambe and the Vasanjoina, one of the history, is Kong Sunyalia, and to do Pembang, and son of member, Genghis, the Rosan Hashangi, Tawati, Tata, the understand Chimatu research, Sondua. So that Nedana Hashang Tangu to the Jorba, couldn't did you check? Then, badly, the Longjing side Paris, Kamalish not as lemne, that Dimaswa. That Kamalish the Hashang Yonzo not as lemne, and Longjing soon the Mate Changua. So not to see him
So I feel that one has to make certain distinctions here. when referring to the historical debate that took place between Kamalashila and Hashang, and some sort of later perception that Hashang was defeated, and people often sort of stated in a very generalized way, as implying as if all the Hashang's views were wrong. But I think one has to make distinctions here. Historically, there have been an order of Hashang, and there was a particular site set up in the Samye monastery during the reign of King Tisong Detsen, when both Shantara Kita and Lopin Padma Sabhava, all of them were there. And if that Hashang's position, that old Hashang's position and views were invalid, then they would not allow such things to happen at that time. But then later there was a debate between Kamalashila and Hashang, and historically it is recorded that Hashang's views were refuted. But we also find a mention in one of the 7 Zös treasuries of Longchen Ramjamba, in which he states that it is due to the lack of adequate merit on the part of the Tibetan people that Hashang's views were not properly understood. And if I personally think he's not referring to the individual Hashang who had a debate with Kamalashila, but rather referring to the old Hashang who was already there.
The basic tradition.
The basic tradition.
While we're on this subject, I'd like to offer a little balance to what may be a misunderstanding of the Zen position. In Zen, we do not teach just to quiet and to dull the mind. And we also...
Yes, that I know.
And we also do not...
I visited, I think at least there's some Zen center in Japan as well as in European countries, yes, in America. Yes, they do, because atmosphere.
Even by entering a sort of a Zen meditation site, you can feel there's a special sort of quality there.
So, yes.
But also, we do not teach just samadhi and just emptiness. All the Zen masters have said that emptiness is not enough. You must break through emptiness. You must have genuine realization. And I'm afraid that there may have been some misunderstanding here today, thinking that we in the Zen sect are satisfied with just concentrating our minds. I hope you understand that those of us who are here from the Zen sect are here because we recognize that there are deficiencies in the Zen teaching as it has come to us from Japan. But Japanese Zen is different from Chinese Zen, is different from Korean Zen, and now we are trying, by coming to a conference that is primarily a Tibetan Buddhist conference, we are trying to enhance and trying to learn from these, from all of you, and to be able to better present the Buddhist teaching in its purity.
Yes, that's certainly. But the Zen tradition and the Theravada tradition, there are certain things we can learn from Zen tradition, from the Theravada tradition. That's no doubt. Even as a Christian, as I mentioned earlier, yesterday, right? Yes.
Excuse me, one more thing, just for your information. Even this year, I hear Tibetan Rinpoche still so uninformed, who speak English, who still say Zen is Hinayana. Zen is only quiet. I'm quoting from abbots who speak English, who travel. Zen is Hinayana. Zen is just Chittamatra. Zen is only Shine. Those are 3 different quotes.
Members.
Also, many lamas say that vipassana meditation is just shine, because they see people just sitting and meditating without visualizing, without chanting, and it's often perceived by us Westerners as kind of a very one-sided education, and it's kind of embarrassing to us in the Tibetan tradition to hear those things.
I think also due to lack of also information. Yes, that is tended to. So therefore, you see, often you see, meeting like this, you see, here is an opportunity of hearing or learning the other traditions' richness, their complete picture. That's very, very useful, very helpful, very necessary. Get calling it tease chat, yeah. Get individual. This morning I a little bit see teasing way, joking or teasing. that means you see, that particular individual case, you see, 30, 40 years you see practice, but still you see something not very satisfactory, so the shape or result. So such case, as I mentioned earlier, you see this. I mean, although you see, they claim they realize shunya, but because of their behavior, their day-to-day behavior, you see, it is questionable whether they really you see, they understand or realize that or not. This does not mean I just hold the Zen tradition is something questionable. You should not read this wrong way.
Completely agree. I completely agree.
The one thing I always say to the other people, this I really feel the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. They firstly, we study about Vinaya, and the so-called Hinayana, Hinayana teaching, like Abhidhamma, and some other text. So as a result, when according to my own personal experience, when I meet, you see, some Thai bhikshu or Sri Lanka bhikshu, you see, there are plenty of common things to discuss about Vinaya, about our role, how to receive bhikshu vows, things like that, and also the eight samadhi, things.
Form and formless concentration.
And you see vipassana and samadhi, these things. Then also when we met some Japanese, either the practitioner of Mikcho or practitioner of Zen, there are a lot of common things. Then for example, one monk from Sri Lanka and one the Japanese Buddhist, when they discuss between them, the Japanese know the Vinaya, at least monk Vinaya is a tradition, not there. Then here, no Bodhisattva vow, these things there. So perhaps less sort of commenting, unless the whole is a Buddhist, the Four Noble Truths, these things are common. But in particular field, I think it's less. Tibetan, because the way we have more, I think the complete form of study and practice. So therefore, when we met the both tradition, there are many common practice. So this indicates the Tibetan Buddhist practice is chatam.
In a way, it is more complete.
But this still I believe. Prejudice.
Your Holiness.
Can you translate that?
Maybe it is biased.
Your Holiness, I will not say this from my own experience, that would be presumptuous, but I will speak for my teacher. When I have had teachings of higher Tibetan practice heard of Mahamudra and Dzogchen, they are very similar to some teachings I have heard in Theravada monasteries from the very best masters. There is a teaching of non-duality, using vipassana to non-duality, where there is much, it sounds like much similarity. So it's also possible that within some of these traditions, the very best, greatest teachers also have some similar realization.
As traditionally, I think traditionally in the past, as a monk from Sri Lanka or from Thailand, they consider Tibetan monk not as a monk, isn't it?
Like a Hindu. Like
And as you mentioned, the Tantra, they consider is completely nonsense. It's something, the degenerate Buddha Dharma. Right? The dangerous sort of the Hindu practice. So these, I think, they mainly is due to their lack of communication.
So this is a little the subject, maybe to finish it off.
Yes.
And maybe to talk more in terms of meditation, because that's what I have done a little. And what I have observed is that the problem for the Westerner is that we often have a tendency to think that if somebody, it could be true, that's what I want to ask Your Holiness, but we have a tendency to think that someone who is highly realized is perfect and is not conditioned. But as I have been with I heard teaching from Tibetan Lama, I heard teaching from Vietnamese teacher, and I also heard lots of teaching from my master, who is a Korean Zen master. And when in the way they are, the way they teach, I can really feel they have great realization because they are very kind, very peaceful, very clear. They all seem to understand that shunyata means interdependence, dependent origination. So they are very high being. So I respect them very much. And all of us, we respect them very much. The problem comes is that, especially with my teacher, because I knew him the most, I stayed with him for 9 years, but I could see that he seems, from my very diluted point of view, he seems to be, although he had great realization, he seems to be limited by his experience in his culture, and also which makes a problem with the Westerner because there is two culture meeting. And the second point was that he seems to be limited by his own method and by his own experiences, because he had only experienced his own method of practice and he got realization through it. Of course, it was the best for him. But then if a friend of mine came and said, oh, Vipassana, and he would say, Vipassana, terrible, you won't get anything with it. Stop Vipassana and you must do my practice, because then you can have great realization. And I heard the same from Tibetan Lama, and I heard the same from Vietnamese teacher. So it seems to me, my question is, if one attains great realization, does one transcend one conditioning of culture and meditative experience, or does one is still limited, but one has experienced and one has one's culture? And also because in a way, the Westerner, we left with this question, is there one method which is best, or are all the methods best?
Profundity of a particular method can be judged only individually for oneself or
Tibetan traditional tradition, when the Jizum Mile Suna to stay in the Zane, Jizum Mile Senior to Sistana.
For instance, if we, let us take the example of Tibetan case, if we are to read the lives of Milarepa and his songs, we will find that there are quite a lot of sort of cynical, sort of sarcastic comments now and then sort of being thrown at scholars who are studying the 5 major treatises.
And now, you see, if we accept, you see, that kind of comment is something absolute true, then all the Nagarjunas, all these, you see, the great Indian Pandits, you see, their work is useless, waste of time. So we cannot say like that. That at the same time, the Milarepas, you see, the comment, also we cannot say this is wrong. So now the conclusion is, I think there are 2 ways. The individual practitioners, you see, the individual practice. English, right? So me get Nyamin Chedan get to
So I think it is important to make a distinction between 2. It's important to make
categories.
Yeah, it is important to make distinctions between 2 levels or 2 categories. One is the moral procedure of an individual's path to enlightenment, and then the state of Buddhist doctrine in general as a spiritual tradition.
Now there's Nagarjuna's work. These Tabachi Langa the Chen. That is study Cheva Chukesh. Tabachi Kasurita, Tabachi, but Drum Chambuchi, but Drum Chazan Duspol Kasure, Lamstan. That the name is Mileb and Sushavati, individual. That Tabachi did a Zawa did a Mangar Jeviche. She, Coach Kazashirawachi, could Yamin Shaji, Lamnic team. That didn't do seriously.
So, literature like Nagarjuna's writing, really what they do is lay out the basic Buddhist framework, which is the sort of the highway, as it were, which outlines the fundamental principles of Buddhism, the general Buddhist approach, and so on and so forth. And then, for instance, instructions of, let us say, masters like Milarepa, there are instances of instructions which are applicable to individual cases.
And many tertiary, the Nyingma tradition, according to Nyingma tradition, many tertiary.
Similarly, many of the instructions found in the revealed traditions of Nyingma. But they ultimately must accord with the general Buddhist framework, general Buddhist path as laid down in the major treatises. So if we were to take a sort of a superficial glance, there seem to be these two sides.
So
in a situations like this conference, where we are talking about the approach of general Buddhist approach and general Buddhist framework and Buddhist principles, then we should take more into account the sort of perspective of the great major treatises like those of Nagarjuna.
Now, for example, you see the one individual cases, like you see your Zen masters is the comment, no need some because of the vipassana. Yes, one particular this individual case, vipassana is most effective. So for that person, you see, only vipassana, the other is not necessary. Someone is the vipassana is the most effective. The vipassana should concentrate on vipassana. Someone different, but then you see the basics of Buddhist structure, both necessary, both right. So I think that's the way.
Because I think the problem with the Westerner is because each teacher say they have the best method, then of course, everybody wants the best.
Yes.
But they go to one teacher and then they hear, oh, this one is even better, so off they go to the next. And he said, I am best. But then somebody else said, I am best. So there is confusion.
In this case, individual case, the study, the complete knowledge about Buddha Dharma, not necessary. One particular is the practice come, and with is guidance, the proper guidance, then can
progress along
yes.
the path. Yeah.
I wonder if you could explain a little bit your thinking when you sometimes recommend having general Buddhist centers rather than Buddhist centers of one specific lineage. Often we have problems that you go to some place and there's a center, and because of the influence of either an Asian teacher or a Western teacher, they're extremely closed-minded, extremely sectarian, and it's very difficult to try to open the minds of these people. If you go and try to explain something different, then either it has no effect, they don't even want to hear you, or then you come up with a possibility that you should start a center of another tradition, so then you're rivals. But often you recommend having some general Buddhist center, a general Buddhist thing. I wonder if you could explain your
general
thinking.
Buddhist is my idea. Other the center on the basis of non-sectarian. The all teaching, all teacher can come and listen. So that is something but in order to materialize such things, it's quite difficult. I don't know. I don't know how to do. I don't know that. My own experience is that I study mainly the Gelug tradition, and the Gelug tradition to me, there is no particular the Gelug tradition actually the Nagarjuna Saraswati the Kasoda explanation, the further explanation according Mare Chandrakirti. So all the Jermushes is the Tongabas Kasoda and the Shungzo Shadidi and the Nag Kasade. Dawat Hagwe Sung do Sigdu Shivasua. Go Tenju to Slavina, Nagarjuna the Sung Tenju to Slavin, Hop the Lavin, the Jermus from Rakshua. The guys from Jermus did Sigdu Shivas, but they don't make him do.
So if you were to look at the writings of Lama Tsongkhapa, you would find that Tsongkhapa sort of strictly follows the terminology, the approach, and the spirit of Nagarjuna, mainly through Chandrakirti. So much so that if you were to come across a Chandrakirti's text from Tenju, which is the Tibetan collection of commentary materials from Indian masters, without knowing that it is the authorship of that is Chandrakirti, you would feel as if it was written by Lama Tsongkhapa.
So in any way, as I study, it's mainly the Tsongkhapa's work. Then meantime, I received teaching from Nyingma tradition and Kogyu tradition and Sayagya tradition. Then, in certain point, where the Tsongkhapa's explanation not very clear, then from Nyingma tradition's explanation very helpful. And a certain point in the Nyingma tradition not very clear. Not elaborate explanation there. The Jermushe's explanation, very useful. So one person, same practice way, the basic practice, so Nyamlin Chiagi, Nyamlin, that never cheap and Nyamlin Chiagi Talia, she did Samalone, Kotus Nabekim. Chigla master Jignis says, Chigla master Jignis Sani, she was Padayaji.
So I think it is very beneficial, at least that's what I found, is not to have a notion that I'm following a particularly unique path, of confined to a tradition, but rather a Buddhist path, and then in specific areas where there is no where you need further clarifications or elaborations, then you can find it from writings belonging to some other tradition, and in other areas you can find some more clear and extensive exposition in writings of some other tradition. So you can sort of incorporate and adapt them into your own path.
Your Holiness, I'd like to talk about the problem of double standards sometimes. This morning, for example, you spoke to Jumbo Sensei and
to the Zen.
Oh yes.
And his teacher, because his teacher was behaving in a very bad way, you thought perhaps that this was because his practice was not a genuine realization. But if we take the example of a Tibetan Lama whose behavior is the same, then although you are very critical of that behavior, nonetheless, because of the tantric tradition, there is always a little possibility that this is a great Mahasiddha. For example, with Trungpa Rinpoche, you quoted Dilgo Khyentse as saying that although he behaved strangely, he seemed to have something very profound. So it makes it difficult for people in the Tibetan tradition to be as open as perhaps in the Zen tradition, because there is another way of evaluating the behavior of their teachers. It seems like
yes, certainly possible. Yes, certainly possible. Sangen nangbedu daran tingdwa. Jik matsang imbi tingdwa. Jitashana. Tami message ya deliberately per nangishi ina tati nizu khara di. Yon sibro da halam da tongda jik na tongda khashana ritsiga ai.
I would say that the same standard applies even in the case of a Tibetan teacher, but still you are right. I mean that there is a logical possibility of some really very exceptional cases.
As I mentioned earlier, so far as I know, almost none who have such really high realization. So then conclusion, those individual lama, I think something lacking.
But their students will see their students will see them as highly realized beings and see them as the one exception.
As I mentioned earlier, about my own example, my two tutor, due to the hunger for power, they fought. Even utilized army, Tibetan army. Disgraceful. On public. So I took a firm stand. These are wrong. But my individual practice, to me, is both very high lama.
This was not.
So it doesn't matter.
This was not the point. The students will think that he is this exception. So it must be okay that he does that.
But even I think the individual student, they believe this is something really marvelous. The Buddha sort of such cities, mass cities, behavior. Then this should not public thought you can't take.
But one should not take it on the public sort of level. At the public level, one may individually view such actions of one's guru as skillful means of Mahasiddha, but one should not take it at the, as a public stand and try to sort of explain it.
Justify.
Yeah, yes. In public, we must follow the general Buddhist path. unless you see that Lama, you see there's some really genuine, authentic miracle things performed. Or then all right, with some scientist, carry test, or genuine miracle, then we can, I mean, we have to accept. Otherwise, you see, we cannot allow, you see, these things.
Because, Your Holiness, I mean, in Korean Zen Buddhism, they have the precept, so it's different from the Japanese. They have the Vinaya there. But the same thing happened.
Oh, Vinaya.
They have the
In
Vinaya.
Korea.
Oh, yes. Then they have Bhikkhuni, they have Bhikkhu, they have everything. And my
Is it celibate?
Yes,
Celibate?
yes.
I say, I know.
But there too, they did the same. The same thing happened.
I was told, you see, some Japanese, you see, came to Korea, and they, you see, bully chance marriage hours.
Yes, they tried.
Yeah.
They tried, but only a few married, and the rest did not marry. And when the Japanese went, they pushed the married one, and there is only, most are celibate. And
Vinaya.
Yeah, Vinaya, yes. But the thing...
Why the sleeves?
Because they are... You'll have to talk with them about this. But the point I wanted to make is that they did the same as in Tibet, that they too have something which is the same as crazy wisdom. They call it unhindered action. And so I think there is, maybe nearly every tradition create a loophole, even if they have the precept. And I agree very much with Your Holiness about what you said.
As I mentioned earlier, the Professor Joshi's, you see, the Indian history. So I think we must take, you see, every care, every precaution. That's full sincerity. No?
Anyone else? Last?
Your Holiness, perhaps I'm confused, but 2 days ago, I believe you said that it would be a good idea to publish in the newspaper if a teacher would not respond and change his behavior, then it would be best to make it a public issue.
Yes.
And I thought you said that with the higher initiations and tantra, that if one accepts a lama as guru, then you should not publicly publish it in the newspaper.
He's your guru. If you have taken as a guru, then can you still publicize? Because you said before you take as the guru, you can criticize, but after you take as the guru.
Now, I think one example is my own case. I received many initiation from, say, one of the, my region, yes. Yet in my, when I talk,
Let me give my own example. I've taken many initiations from one of my regions, and yet at the same time, on a number of occasions, I've made public statements where criticizing, pointing out the wrongdoings of this teacher, especially in my autobiography.
I also mentioned, I think, in my, most of it, I think I mentioned. But one thing is quite sure. I never praise that these wrong things are as good. No, this is shared. That day, now, what our aim is purify Buddha Dharma. The interest of a Buddha Dharma and the interest of one individual Lama, the other is much bigger. Isn't it? So, with sincere motivation, in order to seek Buddha Dharma, in order to seek, at least, few hundred disciples of that particular, Lama, with sincere motivation, with necessary salutation, and criticize. I think that's it, and that's the proper way. And if can, that is the individual disciple, go. go to the straight to the Lama. You say, I done this with sincere motivation, and I apologize. Then that Lama, very sincere Lama, then he or she will
will acknowledge.
If that Lama is furious, that's also another indication. Then just say hello, bye-bye, go. But yeah, isn't it? Yeah. Good. Thank you.